It started with a sound. Not a scream. Not a voice. Just a strange tapping. Metal on stone. In the middle of the night. And it happened every single night. Right there, in the howling wind of the Virginia hills. That's when William Hutchinson decided to follow it. He crept past the woodshed. Past the chicken coop. Toward the Sullivan property. And then. Explosion symbol, he heard it. A child. Sobbing. Just over the fence. In the dark. In the wind. Trapped. The next morning, Hutchinson walked straight into the sheriff's office, pale as a ghost, with just one sentence. There are sounds, chains, whispers. I think there are children in their basement. And this guy? Sheriff Benjamin Crawford? He wasn't just some small-town cop. He'd seen war. He'd faced death. But Hutchinson's face? That was something else. Not fear for himself. Fear for someone else. Someone innocent. Before we go further, ask yourself. Would you have the guts to walk into a house you suspected held children in chains? If you're watching this right now, you're not here by accident. You're one of the few willing to confront stories most people can't even handle. So pause. Smash that subscribe button. Tell us your state in the comments, and if you're brave enough to hear a story from your own backyard. Face screaming in fear. Now, back to the case. Sheriff Crawford saddled up that same afternoon. He brought 2 deputies, a loaded rifle, and a gut feeling he'd never had before. They rode out to the Sullivan farmhouse. It sat crooked on its foundation, like it was leaning away from a terrible truth. Vines curled up its walls like dead hands reaching out to hide something. And when Constance Sullivan opened that front door, the real nightmare was only just beginning. Stay tuned, because what they found beneath that house would haunt this town for generations. And no one was ready. Police cars revolving like warning, what you're about to hear is one of the darkest discoveries in American history. It all started with a single knock on the Sullivan farmhouse door. Sheriff Crawford stood firm. We've had complaints, he said. Mind if we take a look around? Constance Sullivan, widow, wealthy, respected, gave him a cold, tight-lipped smile. Unless you've got a warrant, Sheriff. But then. Clink. Clink. Whimper. From the basement. Everyone heard it. Without another word, Crawford drew his weapon and said, We're going in. And what they found in that basement would ignite one of the largest criminal investigations in American history. It would shake the nation, destroy families, and leave scars that never healed. But in that moment, on October 3, 1831, with boots creaking on dusty wooden stairs, and the stench of decay rising with every step, Crawford didn't know any of that. He only knew something was down there. Something that wept in the dark. And it had been waiting a very, very long time. Electric light bulb the second they stepped inside. They knew this wasn't just a cellar. The air was too cold for fall. The mold was overwhelming. And something else was in the air, something wrong. Crawford's lantern flickered. The silence broke. Chains. A soft cry. Then silence again. And then. Bullseye, they saw them. 7 children. Huddled in the far corner. Eyes red. Limbs thin. Clothes shredded. The youngest was 4. The oldest? 15. Some were chained to the walls. Others just too weak to move. One girl tried to speak. But her voice cracked. She hadn't spoken in weeks. Dear God, a deputy whispered. Sheriff Crawford fell to his knees. We're getting you out of here. He held up the lantern to inspect the chains. Rusted iron. Welded shut. This wasn't just cruelty. This was engineered captivity. They called for help. But aid was slow. Too slow. Nearby towns were hesitant. After all, the Sullivans were respected. Constance Sullivan was known for her charity work with orphans. Now, her reputation was collapsing in the dust and horror of her own basement. The rescue began. One by one, the children were carried out. Some had no names, just nicknames. Mouse. Red. Baby Jane. Several were covered in scars. Not from accidents. From tools. And just when they thought it was over, they found something worse. A hidden panel. A false wall. A second room. Police cars revolving light inside. 40. More. Children. Some unconscious. Some no longer alive. Loudspeaker, and this is only the beginning of the Sullivan mystery. 47 children. 47. Held captive beneath one house. But brace yourself. This was just the beginning. Round Pushpin Millbrook, Virginia. A quiet town, overnight, turned into a war zone of whispers and headlines. Crowds gathered. Reporters swarmed. And the Sullivan farmhouse? A home once admired, now America's darkest secret. That night, as lanterns flickered and horrified neighbors held hands in silence, Sheriff Crawford made a vow. No matter how far this goes, I'll follow it to the end. And trust me, he had no idea how far it would go. The farmhouse was sealed. 24-hour armed patrols. No one in. No one out. From the outside? Whitewashed walls. Green shutters. Innocent. But inside? Rot. Lies. Evil. Then investigators made a chilling discovery. Behind the kitchen pantry. A trap door. Not on the original blueprints. They opened it. A spiral staircase made of stone, winding down into darkness. And at the bottom? A room that changed everything. This wasn't a cell. This was a lab. Instruments. Journals. Preserved biological samples. A rusted examination table in the center. Dried blood. Everywhere. Surgical tools lined the walls. Detailed anatomy diagrams. Leather-bound notebooks filled with cold, clinical notes. Diagram of disease X. Subject number 12, expired at hour 36. Reaction to compound number 9, convulsions, then respiratory failure. This wasn't cruelty for cruelty's sake. This was experimentation. On children. Then, one journal stood out. File folder series 7, live pathogen trials. Inside? Explicit accounts of children deliberately infected with typhus, malaria, tuberculosis. No medicine. No help. Just observation. How long would they last? Let that sink in. This wasn't trafficking. This was medical horror in the name of science. And here's where you come in. This channel? It's not for the faint of heart. It's for those who want the truth, no matter how dark it gets. So if you're still watching, you're different. You're one of us. A seeker. Bell, hit that subscribe button. Comment your state below. Could something like this have happened in your backyard? Because the Sullivan case? We haven't even uncovered the worst part yet. And you won't believe what they find next. Would you be brave enough to hear this story if it happened in your backyard? Because what happens next will ruin everything you thought you knew about justice, power, and the people you trust. Back inside the farmhouse, investigators found something that made everyone stop cold. A ledger. But not just any ledger. This one had names. Not of victims, but of buyers. Necktie 60 entries. Neat handwriting. Dollar amounts. Initials. Ages. Descriptions like, male, 9, healthy, obedient. And the worst part? Some of the initials matched. Town magistrates. Business owners. Even church leaders. This wasn't just about the Sullivan family anymore. This was a network, and it had been operating for over 20 years. When Sheriff Crawford opened that ledger in the courtroom, even his gloves trembled. Each page? A gut punch. Articulated lorry delivery routes. Banknote with $ repeat orders. Children trafficked like livestock. The same names that appeared on donor walls. Were paying for children. Then came the bombshell. Senator R.T. Callahan. A respected Georgian lawmaker. His initials, RTC, appeared 7 times. Each request. Boys aged 8 to 10. Strong. Paid in full. This wasn't just criminal. This was political nuclear fallout waiting to happen. Behind closed doors, investigators panicked. Do we go public now? Risk the evidence getting buried? Wait too long, and they all escape. So Sheriff Crawford did something nobody expected. Page facing up, he leaked a single page of the ledger to the Richmond Sentinel. And then, Fire the South exploded. Slave trade reborn. That was the headline. Below it, a scanned copy of the page. Names partially redacted, but just traceable enough to destroy reputations. The fallout? Immediate. Violent. Chaotic. Some newspapers called it fake news. Others demanded executions. Courthouses filled with angry mobs. And across the country, people asked the question they never imagined. How many other towns are hiding monsters like Millbrook? If you've made it this far, you're not like most people. You're not here for easy stories. You're here for truth, no matter how terrifying. So, bell subscribe. Comment your state. Fire and ask yourself. Could this have happened in your town? Because the ledger was just the beginning. Explosion symbol and what they uncovered next would blow this investigation wide open. People demanded arrests. But what happened next made everything even worse. When Sheriff Crawford dropped the truth on the world, people didn't just get angry. Some turned on him. It's a political stunt. He forged the ledger. But then survivors began naming names. And those names matched the ledger. Now it was undeniable. This wasn't just a crime. It was a system. Scales hash judges. Police cars revolving like sheriffs. Books lawyers. Doctors. Every level of society compromised. And as arrests began, one horrifying question echoed across America. If this happened here, how many other places are hiding the same thing? The answer? Would keep investigators up for the rest of their lives. As the scandal spread beyond Virginia, things got darker. Not louder, quieter. Because now, Sheriff Crawford and his team were staring down something invisible. The Whisper Network. A shadow system of silence. Unwritten. Unspoken. But everywhere. Then came a message from Charleston. Telephone receiver, a woman, Delilah Reeve. Once a nurse at a city orphanage. She wanted to stay anonymous. Her voice was shaking. She'd seen it happen. A man would show up every month. Well-dressed. Confident. The matron would hand over special cases, young, sick, quiet. They'd say it was for recovery in the country. None of them ever came back. Delilah asked questions. And what happened? Crossmark reassigned. Crossmark threatened. Crossmark told, stay quiet, or you're next. And then, explosion symbol, the floodgates opened. Dozens of reports poured in. Orphanages. Hospitals. Poor houses. All saying the same thing. When the right kind of man showed up, you handed over the child. And you? Asked. No? Questions. Meanwhile, journalists started connecting the dots. They found coded telegrams. Money with wings, charity payments, labeled as care dispersals. Card file box # missing records for children who no longer existed. The paper trail wasn't sloppy. It was designed to disappear kids. And suddenly, this wasn't about one house or one town. It was about a machine. A machine that ran in silence. Fueled by power. Protected by society. If you're still watching, you've got guts. Because what you just heard, most people can't handle it. So, previously on this true nightmare, 47 children were rescued from beneath a farmhouse. A secret ledger exposed buyers across America's elite. And a whisper network had kept the entire system alive for 3 decades. But now, things were about to get even worse. In state after state, rumors exploded like wildfire. Fire Mississippi, Alabama, Kentucky. Steam engine crates that cried. Woman #a midwife remembering 3 adoptions in one day, all babies with no names. Construction worker a railway worker in Georgia recalled loading a box that moved, and sobbed. That wasn't cargo, he said. That was a kid. This wasn't a fluke. It was a network. Bigger. Colder. Older. And it had operated in plain sight. Investigators were now drowning in leads. Doors slammed shut. Witnesses vanished. Reporters were stalked. Files went missing. And the worst part? Kids were still disappearing. Sheriff Crawford didn't just have a case. He was now in a war. Bullseye, a war against an entire culture built on silence, power, and exploitation. A war that had lasted over 30 years without anyone daring to stop it. But then, everything shifted. During a second sweep of the Sullivan farmhouse, deputies found something new. A metal locker. Sealed tight. Hidden behind a false wall. It took them hours to crack it open. And inside wasn't money. Wasn't gold. Wasn't names. It was something far worse. Closed book, the basement diaries. A stack of old, leather-bound notebooks. Wrapped in oilcloth. Tied with string. And dripping with one thing, pure evil. Inside? The handwritten journals of Dr. Henry Blackwood. A man once praised as a pioneer in medicine. Now revealed to be a monster in a lab coat. Each entry was more chilling than the last. Some read like science reports. Others? Like giddy torture journals. One passage. Subject age 17, male, ~7 years. Dosed with belladonna. Watched pupil dilation, heart spasms, full seizures. Expired after 32 hours. Pain threshold exceeded expectations. Another? Deliberate typhoid infection. No treatment. Tracked decay. Observations complete after 11 days. Subject unrecognizable. These weren't just crimes. They were systematic experiments on children. And this wasn't just Dr. Blackwood. His journals named assistants. Medical students from Charleston Medical College. Recruited. Paid. Trained to perform death experiments. Who signed off on this? Who funded this? Who knew and let it continue? What started as a rescue mission had become a full-blown exposure of one of the darkest conspiracies in American history. But here's the terrifying part. This story isn't over. A hidden lockbox was found. Closed book inside? Leather-bound diaries, the darkest documents in U.S. history. Written by a man now known as Dr. Henry Blackwood. But you haven't heard the worst part. Let's dive into the most disturbing chapter yet. Inside the diaries were clinical reports, twisted experiments, and crayon hash drawings. Not from doctors. Not from scientists. But from the children. Tucked between pages were frantic, broken sketches. Cages. Syringes. Strange symbols painted on the walls. Stick figures in lab coats, with eyes blacked out. Some of the drawings were barely more than scribbles. Others were heartbreakingly clear. One just said, "Help me." But then came the names. Scroll lists. Pages long. Some matched missing person reports from as far back as 1805. Others had never been recorded. The youngest? Infant G, age 4 days. Scales hashed the moment those records crossed state lines, it was over. Police cars revolving like the FBI, still young at the time, got involved. The diaries were rushed to Washington, D.C. And suddenly, this wasn't just about one farmhouse anymore. It was a national disgrace. One federal memo read, "These diaries aren't evidence. They are a manifesto of cruelty. A blueprint for the destruction of innocence in the name of science, profit, and power." But there was something else, something horrifying. Experts tested the paper and ink. The earliest diary? Calendar dated 1802. That's before Ezra Sullivan ever bought the land. So now the big question was, had the Sullivan farm always been a house of horrors? Or was it just a chapter in something even older? Something ancient, organized, and unstoppable? At the center of it all, one name appeared more than any other. Microscope Dr. Henry Blackwood. He wasn't just a doctor. He was the architect of the pain. The genius of evil. Born in 1783 into Old Money, South Carolina. By 16, he was helping perform surgeries. At 19, accepted into Charleston Medical College. A prodigy. A genius. A sociopath. Classmates said he was cold. Distant. Obsessed with decay, not healing. Fascinated not by life, but how it ended. One professor remembered asking why he never comforted his patients. Blackwood reportedly replied, "I'm not here to comfort. I'm here to observe." This man didn't just design the experiments. He trained others to carry them out. Medical students. Interns. Orphanage doctors. He taught them to see children not as humans, but as data. And now, 100 years later, the damage was still being uncovered. Because buried deep in the margins of Blackwood's notes were coordinates, dates, and the next location in his plan. But before we reveal what that was, explosion symbol, smash that subscribe button for part 7. Speaking head in silhouette, comment the scariest diary line you've heard so far. Round pushpin and tell us, if this was happening near you, would you dare report it? Previously on The Dark Truth Behind the Sullivan Farm. A name kept appearing in the diaries, Dr. Henry Blackwood. He wasn't just a doctor. He was the mastermind. Let me take you back. White down pointing backhand index. By the age of 30, Blackwood had already disappeared from public life. No more classrooms. No more lectures. Briefcase officially retired. European castle reality, he moved back to his family plantation and built a private lab underground. He didn't just experiment. He perfected cruelty. Survivors described him like something from a nightmare. Always wore gloves. Smelled like bitter herbs. Never looked them in the eye. "We weren't kids to him," one survivor whispered. "We were just samples." Blackwood made regular visits to the Sullivan farm. Not as a guest. As the director. He brought trunks of bizarre tools. Jars of oils and powders. He chose the children for his procedures, based on age, health, and obedience. Those who resisted? No entry sign, never seen again. But here's the twist, he wasn't alone. Microscope the diaries revealed 2 other junior physicians, his former students from Charleston Medical College. In public, they claimed, "We were pressured. We didn't know." But their own notes told another story. Writing hand shared observations. Trophy competitions for results. Smiling face with horns, pride in pushing boundaries. So what were they actually trying to do? That's the terrifying part. Some entries hint at immunity testing, pain thresholds, chemical control of behavior. Experimental surgeries without anesthesia. It was like Frankenstein meets MKUltra, a century early. One entry, almost certainly Blackwood's, read. Progress demands sacrifice. These are not children. They are instruments of understanding. Their cries are not suffering. They are data. Explosion symbol. Then came the raid. Federal agents stormed Blackwood's plantation. What they found in the cellar. Open door, a sealed room. Walls lined with scalpels, saws, and clamps. Jars filled with preserved organs, all child-sized. Books, hundreds of handwritten pages, identical to those found at Sullivan Farm. This wasn't theory. This was a blueprint of death. Scales # Blackwood was arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder, human trafficking, medical malpractice, conspiracy. But unlike Ezra Sullivan, he didn't rot in a cell. Moneybag. His wealth bought years of legal delays. Briefcase. Old colleagues defended him as a scientific pioneer. Man # Scales # judges stalled proceedings again and again. But the world had changed. Reporters swarmed courthouses. Parents held up photos of missing children. Survivors gave testimonies that shattered hearts across the nation. Speech balloon. I still see him when I sleep, one girl testified. Speech balloon. He smiled when I screamed. No one could pretend it was science anymore. This was evil. And for the first time, the country was being forced to look it in the eye. Last time, we exposed the terrifying truth behind the Sullivan Farm and uncovered the mastermind, Dr. Henry Blackwood. Now, the world wanted justice. But justice? Man # Scales # it wasn't gonna come easy. Loudspeaker. The public was furious. Headlines screamed. The devil in Virginia. Children sold like cattle. Who else knew? Explosion symbol. Every paper, every street corner, people wanted blood. But the courtroom? Scales # it was slow, messy, and ugly. Bullseye. First target, Ezra Sullivan. Captured red-handed during the raid, literally standing over shackled children. He was the face of evil. And the prosecutors? They unloaded everything. Briefcase. Evidence stacked a mile high. Ledger books. Handwritten letters. Signed contracts. Child pricing guides, age, health, obedience. Memo. Each one a roadmap of the child trafficking network. But his defense team tried everything. He's mentally unstable. Blackwood forced him. The evidence chain is weak. He's an old man. Shrug ## the jury wasn't buying it. When the verdict came. Guilty, on all counts. Kidnapping. Unlawful imprisonment. Conspiracy. Murder. # Scales # the judge ordered death by hanging. Dove # November 15, 1836, Richmond, Virginia. Over 3,000 people gathered to watch Sullivan's execution. His final words? I walked the devil's path, and I fear I shall now meet him. Coffin # the crowd erupted in applause. Justice had been served, but just for one. Performing arts. Enter, Henry Blackwood. Now this was a different beast entirely. While Sullivan was a monster in the field, Blackwood was a monster in a lab coat. And he wasn't going down without a fight. Moneybag. His legal team? Ruthless. Scales # his friends in power? Still loyal. They delayed. They appealed. They tried to move the trial out of state. For a while, it looked like Blackwood might walk free. But the prosecutors had something no one could deny. Books. His own journals. Signed. Detailed. Horrifying. One entry. Subject, female, age 9. Monitored neural shock after rapid blood loss. Outcome, fatal. Insight, valuable. Another. Brain tissue removed in segments. Purpose, behavior correction. This wasn't hearsay. This was science, weaponized. Sullivan was hanged, Blackwood convicted, and the world finally saw what happened in the shadows of Southern respectability. But now, faced with look of triumph, the truth hits harder than ever. White right pointing backhand index, the worst monsters didn't even make it to trial. Performing arts, the rich disappeared. As soon as the Sullivan basement was uncovered, the real power players, dash symbol, they vanished. We're talking briefcase plantation kings, moneybag wealthy donors, secret medical backers. Hashtag the men who bought the children. They didn't run scared, they ran prepared. Chart with downward trend, 7 of the biggest names gone within days. A sugar baron in Louisiana, fire burned every document in his estate before disappearing. A tobacco tycoon in Tennessee crossed the border into Mexico just before warrants hit. One even hosted Dr. Blackwood for medical demonstrations on his property. All escaped. All left nothing behind but whispers and ashes. Hashtag scales, the system was rotten. Even worse? Is the people meant to stop this? Were in on it. Judges, clerks, sheriffs, even state legislators. They took bribes straight from Sullivan's ledger, then tampered with evidence, blocked warrants, erased witness reports. One Georgia legislator's name came up again and again. Survivors remembered him. Letters confirmed him. But the punishment? A public censure. Unamused face. A symbolic slap. He quietly retired, pension intact. No trial. No justice. Fire, the public exploded. Protests flooded city streets. Newspapers ran headlines like, "Justice for sale. The true monsters wear suits. If the law won't clean house, we will." People began asking, black ornament, if they got away this time, how many times before? Black ornament, how deep does it go? Black ornament, will we ever know the whole truth? Because what started on one cursed farm in Virginia, white right pointing backhand index, had roots everywhere. But the question still echoed. How many more are still out there? Monsters in lab coats. 2 doctors from Charleston? They lied through their teeth. Faced with no good gesture, we had no idea, they claimed. But then came the proof. Notebook, their names in Blackwood's journals. Envelope letters detailing procedures. Signed entries noting test results. Fire under pressure from the public, they were stripped of their licenses and sentenced to decades in prison. But the real shock? Classical building Charleston Medical College imploded. The scandal rocked it to its foundation. White heavy checkmark professors knew. White heavy checkmark administrators covered for them. White heavy checkmark ethics were optional. The whole place nearly shut down. And across the country? Scales new laws began forming about medical research oversight, because the nation now understood. This wasn't a few bad apples. This was a tree with rotten roots. Abandoned house the Sullivan farmhouse, from rumor to ruin. Locals always whispered about it. The eerie creaking at night. The dirt path no one walked. The stories parents told to keep kids close. But after the raid? Police cars revolving light, it became America's haunted house. Inside, investigators found horror that defied belief. Link symbol 47 children, some born underground. Whole bones hidden in the walls. Speaker off soundproof ceilings, reinforced doors. Notebooks full of inhuman experiments. Some children couldn't speak. Some flinched at sunlight. Some had never even seen trees or grass. Syringe test logs described. Infections injected. Chemicals tested. Responses measured. Deaths charted like temperature checks. They weren't called by names. Only numbers. A9, expired after 14 hours. Pupil dilation consistent. Nerve resistance high. It wasn't a basement. It was a lab. Old-fashioned key a prison. Coffin a grave. broken heart a nation begins to understand. This wasn't just Ezra Sullivan's crime. It was a network, disguised in wealth and education, hidden in hospitals and plantations, protected by lawmen and lawmakers. And the worst part? It had thrived in plain sight for over 30 years. How many more are hiding? How many more homes? How many more basements? Baby the survivors, 47 kids, 47 stories of horror. The youngest was just 2 years old. The oldest? A boy of 15, who had spent almost a decade in chains. And the only thing he could say? Don't make her mad. What the doctors found was worse than expected. Richmond and Charlottesville hospitals took the children in. But the staff were overwhelmed. One doctor described it as an epidemic of the soul. Broken heart what they found. Starvation. Untreated infections. Scars from makeshift surgeries. Chemical burns. Shattered bones that never healed. But even worse than the bodies? Bomb the minds. Psychological trauma beyond anything seen. Some children froze at the sound of footsteps. Place setting # some wouldn't eat unless given permission. Open door many would scream when left alone, thinking they were being punished. Speaking head in silhouette # some had forgotten how to speak. Others only knew commands from captivity. Be still. Don't cry. Quiet or she'll come. One 8-year-old girl? She had a nightmare every night. She would claw at her skin until it bled. When asked why, she sobbed. The powder, it moves when I sleep. No one could explain what that meant. Some suspected experimental drugs had been used on the children. Abandoned house # the end of the House of Sorrows. Locals called it that, the House of Sorrows. No one protested. Hibiscus people just stood outside in silence. Person with praying hands some prayed. No entry sign no one ever entered again. Then came the whispers. Chains rattling at night. Soft crying behind the trees. Shadows in the windows, but the children were gone. The government seized the land. They tried to sell the house. No one would buy it. They tried to clean it up. No one would go near it. So in 1845, construction sign it was demolished. The basement was filled with concrete. Lock sealed. Forever. Coffin # a grave for the unknown. On the land, a cemetery was built. But not a normal one. No names. Just small markers. Just dates. One plaque read. To the lost, the silenced, and the unseen. You will not be forgotten. Baby the long road to healing. Rescuing them was step 1. But teaching them to feel safe? To trust? To laugh? To be children? That took years. Some never fully recovered. But some? Sparkles began to smile again. Sparkles learned to hold hands without flinching. Sparkles whispered their names for the first time in years. The damage we couldn't see. Some of the rescued children never recovered. One girl, about 6, refused to be touched. When a nurse gently tried to hug her, she screamed for nearly an hour. And tore at her own skin until her arms bled. It was later discovered she'd been used to test nerve response to pain stimuli. No anesthesia. No comfort. No names. Just numbers. Therapists, priests, even ordinary volunteers tried to help. But this wasn't just trauma. It was something deeper, damage wired into the brain. In the 1830s, trauma therapy barely existed. Experts were summoned from Boston, Philadelphia, but they had to invent techniques on the spot. They learned to move slowly. Speak gently. Never, ever force eye contact or touch. One therapist said, "It's like teaching someone how to be human, after they've only known how to survive." Glowing star Rebecca, the brave girl of Millbrook. Among them was Rebecca, 14 years old, the girl who had testified during the raid. Newspaper. Her photo made the papers. People called her the brave girl of Millbrook. Strangers stopped her in the street, crying, thanking her, asking for stories. But she couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. The weight of the attention nearly broke her. Eventually, authorities stepped in. They sent her to live with a quiet Quaker family in rural Pennsylvania. There were no questions. No flashbulbs. Just silence, kindness, and patience. And slowly, she began to heal. Blossom. She never gave another public interview. She married at 21. Had 3 children. And when she died at 73, she still kept one thing folded in her Bible. A yellowed newspaper clipping. Newspaper. The execution of Ezra Sullivan. Candle. Some made it. Some didn't. Some survivors grew up strong. A few became teachers, social workers, activists. But not all stories ended in triumph. Whole. Some struggled with addiction. Coffin. A few took their own lives within 10 years of rescue. Face without mouth. Others simply disappeared, into silence, into the cracks of the world. Because survival is not the same as recovery. And freedom, for some, came too late. Scales. The trial of the century begins. People waited outside for hours just to catch a glimpse. The man they now called Fire, the Devil of Millbrook. Ezra Sullivan entered the courtroom pale, thin, but unshaken. His mere presence sent chills through the gallery. Prosecutors unloaded mountains of evidence. Journals. Receipts for child purchases. Letters in his own handwriting. And hand-drawn sketch artist renderings of the underground prison. But the moment that silenced the entire room? Microphone. Rebecca. She stepped onto the stand. Shaking, but steady. And then, she spoke. In exact, horrifying detail, she described what had happened in the basement. The courtroom broke. Jurors cried. The judge had to pause, twice, to compose himself. Sullivan's fate. The defense claimed insanity. Said he'd been guided by spiritual delusion. But the jury didn't flinch. November 15, 1836, verdict delivered. Guilty. Murder. Kidnapping. Conspiracy to traffic children. Skull. Sentenced to hang. Over 3,000 people gathered to witness the execution. His final words? I walked the devil's road. May the children find peace in the next world, if not this one. Dr. Blackwood, the butcher in a lab coat. Next came Dr. Henry Blackwood, the plantation physician who had designed the experiments. His records read like a horror manual. Skull and crossbones. Intentional infections. Knife surgeries without anesthesia. Toxins injected just to see what happens. Each entry signed, dated, clinically detached. One report. A child intentionally blinded, to study sensory adaptation. A juror fainted. Another juror suffered a nervous breakdown. Scales. Guilty. Multiple murders. Crimes against humanity. He was sentenced to death. But he played the system. Calendar. Delayed his execution for 5 years through legal loopholes. Then in 1841, he died suddenly in his prison cell. Heart attack, they said. But some believe it was poison, a silent favor from the inside. Charleston doctors and the adoption lie. 2 more physicians, this time from Charleston Medical College, were dragged into court. They had disguised child trafficking as adoption. In exchange for money and human specimens. Their defense? Shrug. We didn't know. The jury didn't buy it. Scales. 25 years. Each. Globe showing America's but justice has limits. Others, the rich, the powerful. They ran. Briefcase. A sugar baron. Crown. A state legislator. Classical building. Even a judge. Some boarded ships under fake names. Others were tipped off by corrupt insiders. They fled to Mexico. Europe. The shadows. Because in early America, justice had a price tag. Justice? Not for everyone. While Ezra Sullivan and Dr. Blackwood were convicted and condemned, something darker crept into the light. Warning sign # not everyone faced justice. For every name behind bars, there were others. Briefcase too rich. Too powerful. Too protected. Moneybag the ledger of shadows. From deep inside the Sullivan basement, investigators found ledgers and coded letters. What they revealed: money trails, package shipment lists, #scales #names of buyers, some of the most elite families in the South. One line chilled the room. Shipment of 3 paid by GB of Augusta. Repeating customer. Special requirements noted. Federal agents cracked the code. Left-pointing magnifying glass GB equals George Barrington, a sitting state legislator in Georgia. His signature was everywhere. One letter? He requested older children be delivered, clean, and without noticeable injury. #scales # what happened to him? He was brought before his own legislature. Warning sign # censured. Stop sign but never charged. Why? Pushpin judges owed him favors. Pushpin the sheriff was a cousin. Pushpin fellow politicians were literally on his payroll. He resigned. Then? Vanished. Ghost retired to a private estate in South Carolina. No prison. No trial. No consequences. Globe showing Europe-Africa the Great Escape. Others followed. Within days of the first Sullivan trial. Some boarded ships to Europe. Others changed names. Bought new identities. Or just waited, protected by wealth and silence. Rolled up newspaper # public outrage erupts. Newspapers fired off savage headlines. Newspaper too rich to hang. Newspaper is justice for sale? Newspaper the children are forgotten. The guilty walk free. No entry sign the law wasn't ready. Back then? There were no federal trafficking laws. A child trafficker could just cross state lines and be untouchable. Virginia to Mississippi? Gone. Lost in polite society. Money with wings the broker queen, Constance Sullivan. Ezra's cousin. Package the chief broker of the child trafficking network. Moneybag made $12,000 plus in profit, a fortune in the 1830s. She forged adoption papers. Bribed judges. Moved children like they were property. But her sentence? Chains # fraud. Not trafficking. Not kidnapping. She served 18 months, in a comfortable holding facility. And then? Open door she walked free. Money with wings the money was never meant to be found. The trials exposed horror. But the money? That was a whole other monster. And what investigators uncovered? It didn't just rattle cages. It shook the entire foundation of early American law. The ledger of lies. Beneath the Sullivan farmhouse, behind the floorboards, investigators found it. Books, ledgers, dozens of them. And they weren't encrypted. They weren't hidden. They were chillingly organized. Snowflake # cold. Clinical. Brutal. Names. Dates. Purchase prices for children. Delivery fees. Notes like unfit, resell. Died en route, no refund issued. Requested obedience training. Double charge, subject blonde. The number? Over $200,000. Adjusted for modern value, that's millions. This wasn't just trafficking. This was a financial empire. And the profits? Package hidden in walls. Bank laundered through general stores. Washed through textile mills. Person with praying hands even, charities, for orphans. Face screaming in fear the orphan fund was a lie. One of the most praised charities in the South? It was run by one of the network's biggest buyers. His private letter read, I consider the donation to the fund an excellent shield. Who would question a man who gives bread to orphans? Classical building # justice? Delayed. Denied. Investigators tried to seize assets. But by the time the subpoenas landed, whole # accounts had been drained. # judges delayed hearings. Briefcase corrupt officials looked the other way. Skull the $20 confession. One woman, a midwife, broke. She confessed she'd helped facilitate dozens of illegal adoptions. For each child? Banknote with $20 per head. Electric light bulb more if the child was light-skinned and healthy. And the money? She bought land. Land that her children still own. When asked to return it, they refused. Our mother worked hard for this land, they said. We won't give up what's ours. Fire. This was bigger than one farm. It was never just the Sullivan farmhouse. This was systemic. A 30-year operation built on silence, complicity, and profit. Statue of Liberty, but it sparked a revolution. The people saw the truth. Scales # if the law couldn't reach the powerful, then the law needed to change. And from the ashes of the trial, a movement was born. The house refused to die. Even after the network collapsed. Even after Ezra Sullivan swung from the gallows. The farmhouse still stood. Silent. Watching. Waiting. For nearly 10 years, the house that held 47 stolen children remained untouched. But no one in the town of Millbrook could ignore it. Candle # whispers from the basement. Local kids swore they saw lights flickering at night. Neighbors reported ghost crying in the cellar. Link cymbal chains rattling underground. Musical note whispers in the walls. Even adults refused to go near it. Some begged the government, tear it down. But it was complicated. Ownership drama. The land? Still belonged to Constance Sullivan, Ezra's sister. She was rotting in prison. But from her cell, she wrote, "This land has fed generations of Sullivans. What we did beneath it was for science and survival, not sin." Pouting face. Public outrage exploded. Police cars revolving light. 1845, the bulldozer arrives. Almost a decade later, the order was finally signed. Bullseye. The mission: demolish the house. Erase the evil. But just before the first wall was crushed, a federal team arrived for one last sweep. And what they found would change everything. Again. Closed lock with key. The final chamber. Behind a false wall in the basement, one no one had found before. Package A. Sealed stone room. Inside? 6 tiny skeletons, laid in perfect rows. Each one never recorded, never rescued. And beside them, notebook, a journal. Ezra's handwriting. Closed book, failures. The journal was cold. Precise. Terrifying. Each entry described a subject. Their age. Their resilience. Their outcome, which meant how they died. These 6 were labeled failures. Children who didn't survive long enough to be useful. Children no one ever knew were missing. Broken heart. The house was gone. The horror wasn't. The Sullivan house was finally demolished. The basement sealed with concrete. The chamber never reopened. But even in death, it revealed one last truth. There were still victims no one had counted. Still crimes buried beneath the floorboards. Scales # the trials weren't over, but justice felt distant. The house was gone. The basement, filled with concrete. The cemetery, anonymous, quiet, and off the maps. But the legal war was just beginning. A system in chaos. This wasn't one crime. It was hundreds. Spread across 5 states. Each with their own rules. Each wanting their own trials. Each trying to be the hero. Instead, explosion symbol, it became chaos. Man # Scales # some judges wanted justice. Others had dined with devils. In South Carolina, a judge wept hearing survivor testimonies. In Georgia, a plantation owner walked free. Despite love letter, dozens of letters linking him to child sales. Banknote with $ payments traced to Sullivan's ledgers. Package recorded shipments tied to his estate. The judge shrugged. Circumstantial. Case dismissed. Survivors dragged through hell, again. Children as young as 7 were forced to take the stand. They'd already survived the worst. Now they had to relive it for strangers. Defense lawyers went full monster mode. Your memory is faulty. You're mentally unstable. Are we to trust a traumatized orphan over a respected doctor? One doctor? Acquitted. Then boarded a boat to Europe. New name. New life. Skull justice for some, silence for others. Yes, Ezra Sullivan was hanged. Yes, Blackwood died in prison. But for every villain punished, open door 3 more slipped through the cracks. Because money talks. Because connections protect. Because the system wasn't built to fight crimes like this. The memorial. Back in Millbrook, no names were carved. Just 47 blank stones. And a second row, smaller, for those who never made it. No family came. No names were etched. But sometimes, blossom flowers appear. No one sees who leaves them. Sometimes the worst evil wears a smile. Sometimes the most broken places look like quiet farms. And sometimes, justice comes late, if at all. Candle Hash one voice changed everything. Her name was Rebecca. 14 years old. Held in the Sullivan basement for nearly 5. She remembered everything. Link symbol, the chains. The silence. The door that never opened. But also names. Dates. Smells. Footsteps. Voices. Who paid in gold? Who wore gloves? Who laughed when most of the children couldn't speak? Rebecca whispered to Sheriff Crawford. I can tell you everything. Scales has she was the key witness, and the soul of the trial. Rebecca's testimony broke the case open. Prosecutors had documents. They had ledgers. But Rebecca had truth. Real, human truth. In court, her voice was quiet, but every word landed like a hammer. He wore a green coat and smelled like pipe smoke. He brought the boy in on a Tuesday. His name was Marcus. He didn't make it. The courtroom froze. Reporters described it as unnatural stillness. Even the defense attorneys lowered their eyes. Her memory was surgical. She identified 47 buyers by face or voice. She described procedures with medical accuracy, down to the order of instruments. She named shipment dates before investigators even opened the books. One prosecutor called her the bravest witness I've ever met, and the most precise mind I've ever seen. Rolled up newspaper hash the world took notice. Newspapers stopped calling her a survivor. They started calling her Dove hash Rebecca, the rememberer. Microphone hash, she remembered so others wouldn't have to. Fire. Her testimony sparked more than convictions, it sparked a movement. She stood for every child whose name was never written. Every child who didn't survive to speak. Thanks to Rebecca, a federal anti-trafficking task force was formed. Laws were drafted to prevent jurisdictional hiding. Survivors were given protection and therapy. Public empathy finally replaced polite indifference. Scales hash the trial of Ezra Sullivan was a national spectacle. Over the course of 6 weeks, prosecutors laid bare 3 decades of abuse. They presented meticulously kept ledgers listing prices, physical traits, and conditions of purchase. Photographs of the cellar, where children had been restrained, marked, and experimented on. Receipts for chloroform, surgical blades, and shipping crates. And most haunting of all, the journal, found behind a false wall. In it, Ezra described some children as promising material, others as non-compliant and disposed. One entry read, "Losses this quarter, for unteachable, unprofitable." The courtroom gasped when those pages were read aloud. More than once, the judge had to call for recess due to sobbing spectators and vomiting jurors. Sullivan's defense was chilling in its own right. His attorneys argued he was a scientific pioneer, a man born too early for his ideas to be appreciated. They called on medical experts who had never seen the basement to speculate on his intentions. They said the real crimes were being sensationalized by the press. But nothing could spin the truth away from what Rebecca remembered, and what the world had now seen. When the verdict came, there was no applause, only silence. Guilty on all counts. Sentence, death by hanging. Ezra Sullivan blinked once. Then looked down at his hands as if surprised they were still there. He died less than a year later, after 3 failed appeals and a final letter claiming he had done nothing but serve the pursuit of knowledge. That letter was burned by the judge who sentenced him. Candle hash, but Ezra's death didn't end it. His conviction was the beginning, not the end, of a reckoning. Within months, Congress held emergency hearings on cross-state trafficking. State-level investigations turned up similar patterns in New Orleans, Baltimore, and Charleston. And in 1847, the Child Protection Act was signed into law, the first legislation of its kind. Books Blackwood's medical journals were the trial's centerpiece. Each entry read like a nightmare in academic prose. Subject number 17, 9-year-old, female. Injected with smallpox serum. Reaction, elevated fever, blistering, delusions. Expired after 3 days. Notes, specimen too weak. Will repeat with sturdier subject. He numbered children instead of naming them. Logged deaths as data loss. On the stand, the forensic examiner who had reviewed the journals broke down in tears. He had served in battlefield hospitals, he said, but nothing had ever haunted him like Blackwood's notes. Blackwood's defense? It was for the advancement of science. His lawyers claimed he was a pioneer, a man experimenting at the edges of knowledge, in an age before bioethics. They argued that no laws had specifically banned his work at the time. But public opinion didn't care. Nor did the jury. He tortured children in the name of progress, the prosecutor said. There is no progress worth this price. Hammer, the verdict was inevitable. Blackwood was found guilty on 37 counts of aggravated murder, abuse, and medical malpractice. His sentence, death by hanging. But the execution never came. Blackwood died in his cell before justice could be carried out. 3 weeks before his scheduled hanging, he was found dead in his bunk, face pale, tongue blackened, cyanide. How he obtained the poison remains a mystery. Some believe a sympathetic guard gave it to him. Others say a former ally helped him avoid the rope. But one note was found clutched in his hand. It read only, "History will vindicate me." It didn't. His name became synonymous with cruelty. His trial became the core of America's first medical ethics reform. And in the decades that followed, every oath taken by a physician began to carry one unspoken footnote. Do no harm, or become another Blackwood. And in that revelation, the nation confronted a truth far more unsettling than one man's crimes, that cruelty, when cloaked in prestige, can flourish unchecked. Following Blackwood's conviction and suspicious death, Charleston Medical College and its affiliates came under intense scrutiny. Investigators uncovered communications between faculty and Sullivan's estate, revealing a quiet but persistent exchange of anatomical specimens, medical notes, and grant money. Though some doctors denied knowledge of the source. Their signatures appeared on ledgers alongside references to unclaimed youth and donated tissue. A formal inquiry led by a federal medical oversight board exposed a web of informal agreements and ethical evasions. In some cases, entire lectures had been built around data collected through torture. Students recalled being told not to ask where cadavers came from. One internal memo chillingly advised staff. Do not inquire if the child was living at the time of harvest. Ask only what the lungs reveal. The fallout was swift. 4 professors were dismissed. 2 fled the country. Federal funding to Charleston Medical College was cut. Medical journals that had once praised Blackwood's research publicly retracted articles and issued apologies. But none of it could erase what had already been done, or the prestigious silence that had enabled it. The national backlash gave rise to a movement, one driven not by politicians but by young doctors, reformers, and survivors' advocates. In 1844, Congress held the first hearings on medical oversight in American history. Survivors testified. Rebecca's name was spoken again, not as a symbol of suffering, but as the proof that human cost must never again be ignored in the pursuit of discovery. From those hearings came the Whitfield Report, named for Dr. James Whitfield, one of the few physicians who had turned against Blackwood early. It was the first document to outline basic ethical guidelines for human experimentation, including informed consent, mandatory reporting of research outcomes, and the establishment of ethics boards in all teaching hospitals. By 1850, 8 medical schools had adopted these standards. Charleston Medical College was not among them. Though it remained open, its influence declined. To this day, its archives from the 1830s and 40s remain sealed, a legal battle still unresolved. And yet, for all the horror and secrecy, the Sullivan case became a turning point. A wound that forced the body to heal differently. Because Dr. Henry Blackwood wasn't just a cautionary tale. He was the reason a generation of physicians began to ask not just what could be done in the name of science, but what should be. Would you like to follow how this wave of reform impacted future medical legislation, or return to other figures still left standing in the aftermath, perhaps Sheriff Crawford, the other doctors, or surviving plantation allies? It was supposed to be a school of science, brilliance, and progress. But what investigators uncovered inside Charleston Medical College was a nightmare disguised as education. The moment the Blackwood case cracked open, the spotlight hit the college, and what came spilling out was more than just bloodstained journals. It was a web. A network. A culture of silence. At first, it was just 2 doctors, assistants to Blackwood's twisted work. But then the letters surfaced. Secret memos. Whispers in ink. And one sentence burned itself into history. We are not priests. We are doctors. Sometimes blood must be spilled to heal the future. That line shattered the illusion. This wasn't just one madman. This was an entire institution hiding behind the mask of science. Faculty had helped. Others had watched, and said nothing. Years of missing children, unexplained screams from locked wings, red flags swept under Persian rugs. And once the truth went public, the country exploded. Families of former students demanded to know how their sons and daughters studied under men who experimented on orphans. Preachers roared from pulpits, calling it evil cloaked in education. Protesters surrounded the gates. Administrators ran for cover. The college nearly collapsed. The state almost shut it down. But from the ashes came something no one expected. Reform. For the first time in U.S. history, real laws were written. Laws to protect human subjects. Laws that banned experimentation on minors. Laws with real consequences. Suddenly, medical schools everywhere had to answer tough questions. Ethics committees were born. Students took courses in morality. And the name Blackwood? It became a curse. A story told not to inspire, but to warn. But even with justice crawling from the wreckage, some questions refused to die. How could so many brilliant men fall silent? Why did no one report the cries in the dark? And how close did we come to never knowing any of this? One answer echoed loudest. Because the experiments didn't just survive in the shadows. They thrived in them. This wasn't just corruption. This was a system built on silence. And now, we're exposing it. Even after the Sullivan network crumbled. Even after Blackwood's medical horrors hit the front page. Something worse was still crawling out of the shadows. It wasn't just the monsters who committed the crimes. It was the system that fed them. Protected them. Paid them. Courtroom after courtroom revealed the unthinkable. Judges, orphanage directors, even church leaders. They weren't just asleep at the wheel. They were driving the damn bus. Hundreds of children vanished from poorhouses and state shelters. No investigations. No outrage. Just missing files, forged signatures, and falsified death records. And here's the twist that stopped the nation cold. The people who were supposed to protect the kids were the ones selling them. Then came the money trail. What started as whispers turned into financial shockwaves. Investigators followed the cash. And it led straight to boardrooms, plantations, private clinics. Even the state capitol. Doctors. Legislators. CEOs. Respected families in Virginia, Georgia, South Carolina. All caught with blood on their ledgers. But did they face justice? Almost none of them. Because in America, power protects itself. One trial changed everything. A Georgia lawmaker, connected directly to Sullivan. The evidence? Overwhelming. Wire transfers. Witnesses. Testimonies from children. But guess what? He got a slap on the wrist. A formal censure. No jail. No charges. The public erupted. Headlines screamed, "Justice denied." Again. People filled the streets, chanting, "Fire, justice for the forgotten children, fire." One federal marshal said, "I've seen horse thieves get more time than these monsters." And still, justice stalled. Evidence vanished. Witnesses recanted. Statutes of limitations closed doors faster than the truth could knock. But this story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because the people weren't just demanding justice. They were coming for the whole damn system. And what happened next would rewrite history. They thought the nightmare was over. But they were dead wrong. Some of the monsters fled. Private jets. Forged passports. New names in Europe. Vanished. Erased. Protected by wealth. Shielded by silence. But here's the kicker. It wasn't just the powerful who were guilty. It was everyone who looked the other way. Neighbors. Clergy. Teachers. Friends. People who had passed Sullivan's farm 100 times. And never stopped to ask, what's going on behind those trees? Now they were asking hard questions. Did we hear the screams? Did we choose not to? The guilt hit like a tidal wave. Churches lit candles. Schools rewrote curriculums. Old men broke down in town halls. Because now they knew. Evil hadn't been hiding. It had been right there, ignored. And then, the farmhouse. The place that became America's house of horrors. Once just a crumbling structure tucked in the woods. Now, a crime scene etched into the soul of the nation. When the raid happened, they thought the worst was over. 47 kids, chained in a basement. Starving. Forgotten. But that was only level 1. Forensic teams kept digging. And what they found? Hell. A collapsed root cellar opened into something no one was ready for. A secret chamber. Steel-reinforced doors. No light. No escape. Inside. Surgical tables rusted with blood. Leather straps. Cracked jars of formaldehyde. Scalpels. Saws. Screws. The stench? One investigator said. It smelled like chemicals and ghosts. Walls that seemed to cry. And then, the bones. Hundreds. Small. Fragile. Children. Experts counted 76 victims. Some with shattered limbs. Others with precision-cut incisions. All abused. All discarded. But here's the twist no one expected. This place had been engineered. The farmhouse wasn't just old, it was designed for darkness. Trapdoors. Hidden corridors. False walls. A dumbwaiter connecting the kitchen to the underground lab. Even a sealed room with no windows. No vents. A coffin disguised as a bedroom. Children were kept there. In silence. In darkness. For weeks. And the most terrifying part? It worked. For years, the whole system did exactly what it was built to do. Torture. Silence. Disappear. Until one day, someone finally looked. And everything exploded. But the scars? Those would last forever. What they found next changed everything. Hidden behind a rotted floorboard in the Sullivan farmhouse. Dozens of leather-bound notebooks. Each one handwritten. Each one numbered. But no names. Only child number 0047. Number 0089. Number 0173. Arrival dates. Weight. Physical condition. Even handwritten notes from buyers. This wasn't chaos. This was a system. Methodical. Calculated. Industrial. These books didn't just document pain. They proved it was all premeditated. The court called them the Sullivan logs. But the community? They called them the Devil's Ledger. Yet it wasn't the blood. It wasn't the bones. It was the normalcy that haunted them. That house, that literal torture den, had hosted church picnics, Easter egg hunts, political fundraisers. People had laughed there, prayed there, all while children screamed beneath their feet. Neighbors remembered seeing kids outside, smiling, playing, and they assumed, oh, they must be adopted. But when those same neighbors stood before the ruins, they all whispered the same chilling question. How did we not see it? In 1845, the government bulldozed the house. The basement was sealed in concrete. A memorial stone placed on top. It read, "To the lost, may we never forget you again." But even as the dust settled, another secret surfaced. This one wasn't buried in the ground. It was hidden in the walls. Inside a false panel upstairs, agents found a set of ledgers. But not like the others. These were pristine. Names. Codes. Bank routes. Shipments. Dates. This wasn't just torture. This was commerce. They called it the blood ledger. A forensic accounting team spent weeks decoding it. And what they discovered was terrifying. Constance Sullivan had built a multi-state trafficking empire. And it was making her rich. Over $12,000 across 20 years. That's hundreds of thousands today. And here's the twist. The money didn't just come from selling children. She had sponsors. Doctors. Professors. Foreign clients. Paying for results. Paying for data. One client in France paid for monthly updates on how long it took a child to go blind in complete darkness. And the money trail? It went everywhere. A blacksmith shop in Pennsylvania. A textile mill in New York. Even a shipping company in Baltimore. All under fake names. All papered with false IDs. Some using the names of the dead. Some using judges. Sheriffs. Politicians. And what couldn't be traced was turned into gold. Buried. Bribed. Erased. Federal agents recovered some. But most of it, gone. Just like the children. This wasn't a crime. It was an empire. Built on silence. Fueled by science. And paid for by people you were taught to trust. And it all started with one woman, one farm, and a lie no one dared to question. This wasn't just a crime ring. It was a machine. Fueled by cash. Shielded by law. Fed by the innocent. And at the heart of it, orphanage directors on payroll. Not rumors. Cold, hard proof. Monthly envelopes. Bribes. Retainers. Blood money. The network had infected the system. Judges, clergy, sheriffs, social workers, all playing a part, or staying silent. One case broke the nation's heart. A woman in North Carolina fought in court to adopt her orphaned niece. Denied. 2 months later, the same child was found listed in the Sullivan ledgers, sold. Let that sink in. And then the names started dropping. Not nobodies. Somebodies. A Georgia legislator. A Tennessee shipping tycoon. 2 surgeons from Charleston Medical College. All linked. All documented. All protected. Prosecution? Suggested, but never pursued. Why? Jurisdictional loopholes. Missing files. Political interference. Some simply vanished. Gone. With their fortunes. With their secrets. What investigators realized was beyond horrifying. This wasn't hidden in shadows. It was designed to survive. A business model. Cold. Scalable. Profitable. And for every villain caught, 10 walked free. Clean. Untouched. Shielded by silence. Once the trials ended, and Sullivan was executed by hanging, people assumed it was over. But it wasn't. Not even close. The Sullivan farm, now a federal property, became ground zero for one last sweep. Investigators returned. Armed with early magnetic scanners, blueprints, and one mission. Leave no stone unturned. They found hidden compartments behind crumbling walls. Scorched, half-burned diaries under the fireplace. A child's wooden doll buried beneath the barn floor. Every item was a relic. But more than that. They were memorials. To the lives stolen. To the futures erased. And then came the auction. Not a single bid. Developers stayed away. Buyers ghosted. Locals wouldn't go near the land. The farm was cursed. By memory. By truth. The house stood abandoned. Its windows shattered. Paint peeling like skin. The shutters banging like a heartbeat in the wind. And kids in the area. They whispered legends. About screams in the night. About eyes watching from the collapsed cellar. About the children who never got out. This wasn't some backwoods nightmare. This was a network, protected by power, funded by science, and ignored by an entire community. And every time someone stayed silent, the machine kept going. Kids dared each other to touch the front door. Most never even made it past the shattered fence. Because even decades after the raid, the screams hadn't stopped. Local legends whispered about ghostly voices. Disembodied cries drifting from the trees. And when the wind blew just right on a cold November night, you could hear it. A breath, a whisper, a name never spoken. By 1845, 9 years after the Sullivan basement was ripped open, the government had enough. They made a decision. No more ruins. No more ghosts. No more reminders. That rainy spring morning, men arrived with axes, shovels, and a simple order. Erase it. They tore the house down, beam by beam. Every plank, every nail, ripped apart. Not a single piece left behind. Even the rubble? Burned in another county. Why? So no one could take home a souvenir of evil. Then came the concrete. Thick. Heavy. Final. A material so new, it was rarely used. But here? They sealed the soil with it. Forever. But just when you think it ends in silence. A miracle. In a rare act of compassion from a cold, indifferent era. A cemetery was built. No names. Only numbers. Only memory. Of the 47 rescued, only 12 victims were ever identified. The rest? Vanished. Forgotten. The graves were simple. But powerful. And locals, mostly Quakers, came every year. They planted wildflowers, built a wrought iron fence, protected the forgotten. Today, that land is a forest preserve. No plaques, no tourist signs, just stillness. But if you visit in November, they say you might still hear it. Something beneath the soil. And while the earth was sealed, the people were not. Because once the truth hit newspapers, America exploded. This wasn't just horror. It was a national betrayal. Public outrage erupted. Town halls overflowed. State capitals flooded with letters. Anger, fury, grief. All aimed at a system that had stayed silent for too long. And for the first time, change came fast. Virginia moved first. Boom, first ever child protection law in U.S. history. It was bold, sweeping. Any home with more than 3 children not their own required a license. Government oversight. Background checks for adoptions. Routine inspections. Medical record audits. No more hiding. No more loopholes. No more Sullivan networks. America woke up. And the fire for justice burned brighter than ever before. But even then, some scars never heal. And some whispers never fade. Clapperboard, this wasn't just a tragedy, it changed America forever. When Virginia passed the first ever child protection law, it wasn't just historic. It was revolutionary. Because before the Sullivan case, children were seen as property, burden, afterthought. Now, they were finally seen as people. And Virginia didn't stand alone. Fire Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, New York, all followed. Child welfare laws exploded across the country. For the first time ever. White heavy checkmark state-run orphanages. White heavy checkmark government oversight. White heavy checkmark background checks. White heavy checkmark medical records. White heavy checkmark mandatory inspections. The idea? You can't just hide children in basements anymore. And when investigators realized how criminals like Ezra Sullivan could evade capture by simply crossing state lines, Congress acted fast. Police cars revolving like new federal laws were passed. The U.S. Marshals gained power to chase traffickers across state lines. This case became the spark for national policing strategies. Blueprints that would later lead to the FBI. Because Sullivan didn't just expose evil. She exposed a broken system. And that system was about to change, forever. But here's the part that still makes people cry in archives. The letters. Hundreds of them. They weren't found in law books or testimonies. They were found in the basement. Fire half-burned. Scrolls scattered across the floor. Closed mailbox with lowered flags, some sealed, others open. Investigators called them the language of the lost. At first, they looked like ordinary notes. But when decoded, they were purchase orders. For children. Shipment ready. Need another girl. Age 6 to 8. Quiet disposition. Do not brand this one. Client insists on clean goods. No emotion. No guilt. Just cold business. One letter, called the Charleston Ledger, described a girl's weight, height, and tone of voice. No lisps or stutters, it said. The senator finds those unpleasant. Yes. A U.S. senator. Some letters were signed with fake initials. Others were just brazenly signed. By judges. Doctors. Politicians. Like they never thought they'd get caught. But they did. These letters became a map. Federal agents used them to detective trace payments, connect missing children, decode the entire network. They even became part of law enforcement training. Police cars revolving light, new placement. Police cars revolving light, quiet arrival. Police cars revolving light, gift for the master. Red flags. Life-saving clues. And still, even decades later, archivists broke down reading them. One described the letter archive as a museum of human failure. Every envelope a tombstone. And one line, just one line, still echoes through time. We expect delivery by the next full moon. The boy is to be drugged beforehand. He tends to scream. That wasn't a monster speaking. That was someone's neighbor. Someone's mayor. Someone's doctor. Evil, written in perfect cursive. And that's what the Sullivan case taught the world. It's not always hidden in the shadows. Sometimes it's sealed with wax. Stamped with gold. And delivered like a letter. Because monsters don't always growl. Sometimes they write. Loudspeaker, you thought justice was served? Think again. When investigators uncovered the horrifying truth behind the Sullivan operation, people assumed justice would follow. But what happened next? Moneybag money talked. Power walked. Prosecutors were ready. They had photographic proof. They had survivor testimony. They even had handwritten orders for children, in perfect ink. And still? The system crumbled. Why? Because the people they were going after weren't monsters in the dark. They were governors' friends, respected doctors, wealthy plantation owners. Men in tailored suits with names carved into courthouse plaques. One Georgia legislator was exposed as a repeat buyer of trafficked children. Used state influence to forge adoption papers. Rubber-stamped by judges he knew personally. When his name came up at trial, the state legislature gave him a symbolic censure, a meaningless slap. He violated no laws, a colleague claimed. Just social expectations. That one sentence. Fire, it burned itself into public memory. Because what it really meant was, if you're rich enough, you can buy innocence and walk away smiling. And it didn't stop there. One Charleston physician, caught red-handed, had his 25-year sentence reduced to 5. Why? Because he'd served his community. Police cars revolving light, let that sink in. You can torture children, but if you donated to the local hospital, you're good. Newspapers were furious. People took to the streets. Megaphone, how many got away? Pamphlets filled cities. From Richmond to New York, the outrage was everywhere. White right pointing backhand index, even abolitionists joined the fight, saying child trafficking was just another face of slavery. They marched. They shouted. They printed editorials. One line from Boston? It is easier to hang a poor man with a stolen loaf than a rich one with a stolen life. That hit different. Because it wasn't just about Sullivan anymore. It was about the system. A system that let monsters in mansions walk free, while orphans in basements died forgotten. And here's the twist. Even with all that evidence, all that anger, and all those protests, briefcase most of the powerful men behind it, they never saw a jail cell. They vanished. They bribed. They manipulated. They won. Because justice in America, in the 1830s, it came with a price tag. And if you could afford it, you were untouchable. But the people didn't forget. They remembered every skipped trial, every lenient sentence, every stolen name. And they demanded change. Because the real horror wasn't just in the basement. It was in the courtroom. In the handshake. In the wink. In the smile of a man who knew he'd never be punished. Explosion symbol, and that is what finally woke the nation up. You could be standing in a building paid for by that money and never know it. That one quote ignited national outrage. Because what had once looked like charity now reeked of guilt laundering, a strategy to buy silence and earn sainthood with blood money. Left-pointing magnifying glass investigators called it the most sophisticated criminal ledger of the century. Ledgers didn't just list names, they told stories. A6, silent, trained for indoor. B4, healthy lungs, possible for mines or mills. Twin pair. Matched weight. Sold together at client's request. Every page was like an invoice from hell. Every signature a nail in the coffin of decency. At the center of it all? Constant Sullivan. She didn't swing whips. She swung ledgers. While others inflicted pain, she ensured profit. Chart with upward trend over $12,000 in personal gain over 2 decades. An empire built from broken lives. When adjusted for inflation, it's nearly $400,000, and that's just her cut. But what shocked officials most wasn't just how much she made. It was how she spent it. Money with wings. The profits were washed clean through general stores, textile mills, bank shares, a local church endowment, even a politician's campaign. These weren't secret stashes hidden in floorboards. They were investments in society. Necktie the same towns that buried the victims, praised the benefactors. And by the time law enforcement closed in, the money had vanished. Disguised in trusts, routed through shell businesses, or smuggled abroad. They recovered only a fraction. Performing arts. It was a financial horror story masked by civility. A school gymnasium? Built with trafficking proceeds. A church bell? Donated in honor of a beloved matron, funded by slavery. A public well? Paid for with profits from selling a child to a mining company. This was evil in polished shoes. Not just about what was done, but what was accepted, even celebrated. As headlines screamed and communities panicked, people demanded accountability from those who once praised the Sullivans. Churches rushed to rip down plaques. Schools renamed wings and scholarships. Scroll charity records were quietly purged. But the stain was already set. We thought we were helping, one town elder said. Now we know we were bought. The Sullivan case had revealed more than a network. It revealed a rot, systemic, deliberate, and enriched by silence. And as the investigation shifted from blood to banking, it became clear. Electric light bulb. The real crime wasn't just cruelty. It was how profitable cruelty could be. When no one dared to ask where the money came from. Buildings were renamed. Endowments were returned. But the stain remained. It wasn't just about tearing down plaques. It was about confronting the fact that entire communities had flourished, economically, politically, and socially, off the backs of missing children. And now, those communities were being forced to ask, how much of our success was built on silence? Scroll. As investigators fanned out across the country with Sullivan's letters in hand, the picture grew darker. A ledger in Georgia linked to 16 disappearances from a Savannah orphanage. A coded correspondence in Pennsylvania tied a bishop to off-the-books adoptions with prepaid arrangements. In New York, records connected a now-defunct hospital to a supply chain of sedated children sent south for conditioning. These were not isolated monsters. These were interlinked enterprises. And though some had collapsed long ago, their footprints remained. The Sullivan case didn't just uncover a crime. It cracked open a network. Across 6 states and dozens of towns, common patterns emerged. The language was similar. The cover-ups followed the same script. The hierarchy always pointed up. In almost every case, the children came from poor families. The guardians were underfunded, overworked, or corrupt. And the predators? Well-dressed, well-spoken, well-connected. National media took notice. Newspapers shifted from lurid headlines to investigative deep dives. What price for a child? The hidden industry behind orphan care. Can a country be complicit and still be free? Historians called it a slow moral explosion. One that restructured American consciousness. Graduation cap in universities, lectures shifted focus. Sociology classes dissected the Sullivan network as a case study in structural evil. Law schools began teaching the Sullivan loophole, a term coined to describe how legal systems fail when power shields crime. Theologians asked, What does charity mean in a system where suffering can be monetized? Broken heart and at home, ordinary people ask different questions. Why are orphanage records sealed? Who funds the homes that house the poor? Are good intentions enough to protect a child? One mother from Ohio, whose own daughter had been lost in the 1850s and never found, wrote to her local paper. I used to believe she ran away. Now I wonder whose house she was sold into. Pushpin. The legacy of the Sullivan case was not just in what it exposed, but in what it made impossible to ignore. It reminded a nation that evil does not always wear rags. Sometimes it wears a collar. Sometimes it runs a charity. And sometimes it leaves behind ledgers written in gold ink. The basement didn't just change America. It revealed it. They thought it was just another farm. Neat hedges. White fences. Sunday smiles. But behind those polished windows was hell. When whispers turned into screams, America snapped awake. Legislators scrambled. Laws changed overnight. Background checks became mandatory. Oversight committees sprang up. Child welfare groups that had operated in shadows were yanked into the light and held accountable. The lie that, "it can't happen here," was dead. The Sullivan farm proved otherwise. If horror could hide there, it could hide anywhere. And suddenly, everyone was watching. What followed wasn't just a trial. It was a reckoning. But none of it would have happened without three people whose courage cracked history open. It started with William Hutchinson. Just a farmhand. No badge. No rank. No voice, until he used it. He'd heard things. Seen shadows moving when they shouldn't. Most would have stayed quiet. But he spoke. No reward. No safety net. Just the truth. That spark lit the match. Then came Sheriff Benjamin Crawford. He got the report. He could have buried it, like others had. Could have taken the bribe. Could have walked away. But he didn't. He gathered his men, stormed the Sullivan property, and pried open a door no one had dared to touch. What he found changed the nation. And then, Rebecca. 14. Traumatized. Barely able to speak. But when she did, the whole country held its breath. Her testimony didn't just bring Ezra Sullivan down. It ripped the mask off an empire. She described rooms with no windows. Chains that never came off. Buyers who treated children like objects. She stared down power and didn't blink. After the trial, Rebecca disappeared from public view. She never gave another statement. Never stood on a podium. But her silence became a monument. A reminder of what survivors carry long after headlines move on. Today, the Sullivan farm is gone. In its place, rows of white stones. Many bear no names. Just dates. A bronze plaque stands in the grass. It reads, "To the children who were silenced, we hear you now." What started in a forgotten field rewrote laws, rewired institutions, and reignited the fire of moral courage. It showed the world what happens when ordinary people refuse to look away. Because sometimes, the only way to destroy darkness is to open the door and walk straight into it. Evil, if left unchecked, can smile politely, mow its lawn, and wave from a front porch. It can wear the mask of normalcy and thrive right in front of us. But this story? It proved something else, too. That one voice, just one, can ignite a wildfire of truth. That when one person dares to speak, 100 others find the strength to rise. The system? It was shaken. Exposed. Wounded. But it did not fall. It changed. Because someone listened. Because someone spoke. Because someone cared. And in the end, the darkness didn't win. It was dragged into the light.